Hello there, you beautiful soul, and welcome back to another Wellness Talk with your host and founder of Cultured Society. I am here with not another special guest because Bonnie has been with me for the month of March, and I'm so grateful that she is here just giving her time and her knowledge away to conversations that need to be had every single day. And I know that are going to help those that are going to tune in. So, Bonnie Maley, if you have not had the opportunity to tune into our conversations this month, she is a self realization coach with over 20 years of experience in personal, relationship, and executive development coaching arenas. She's also a published author, workshop facilitator, and public speaker. Bonnie has been helping people shift their perspectives while providing a non judgmental, supportive environment and the tools that truly impact the outcome of everyday life experiences and circumstances. So today we are here to talk about relationships. And although relationships is a very broad term and can be related to a lot of different components, whether you're married or single, we all desire to have healthier and stronger relationships in our lives, especially now. And relationships have the capacity to contribute to our greatest joys and also some of our greatest struggles. And so, quite frankly, relationships can be extremely challenging to maneuver through, especially when we're trying to improve the relationship with ourselves and then also improve the relationship with other people. So, Bonnie's here to help us understand relationships, relationship dynamics, and to help us sustain healthier relationships over the course of our lives. So I'm going to pass over the mic to Miss Bonnie Maley, and thank you so much again for joining me today.
It is a pleasure. And I will tell you, relationships push our buttons probably more than anything else does, right?
Absolutely.
And so I am hoping that today I'll be able to give everybody a little insight into what that's all about. And so I want to start out with why are we in relationship and what is the purpose of relationship? And although this can apply and of course applies to intimate relationships, it can be the relationship that you have with your parents, with your siblings, with your coworkers, with your boss. Everything that I'm going to share with you applies in all of these arenas. So relationship, I think probably the reason we have so much difficulty with them to begin with is because our perception of what they're all about is a little bit off. And so, from the ego's viewpoint, relationship is about gratification. It's about making me feel good. It's about fulfilling me. It's about making me whole. We hear songs on the radio like, I need you like water, like breath, like rain. Which, by the way, need is not love, need is need. Um, we hear, I can't live if living is without you. You made me so very happy. And so we have this misperception about what relationship is all about. It's going to be my salvation. It's going to complete me. Mini me, you complete me. So that's not really what relationship is here for in our lives on a spiritual level. On a spiritual level, relationship is here to help us grow. And as far as I'm concerned, nothing has helped me grow more than the relationships that I have in my life. You do have to understand what it's all about, and you do have to know how they're helping you grow, because without it, it just causes a lot of issues and problems and contention and arguments and fights. And so I want to maybe give you a little insight into how this all works. So basically, relationship is here to reveal you to you. And I remember when I first learned that idea, the way that it was presented to me is that relationships are a mirror to you. And when I first heard that, I had a misunderstanding of it. I thought, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I'm looking at somebody and I think they're nasty, I must be nasty too? And that's the mirror? But it's not exactly how it works. The way that the mirror works is that when you are interacting with another human being and they're just being them, we have a reaction to that. It brings out our joy, it brings out our laughter, it might bring out our intellect, it might bring out our inquisitiveness. But oftentimes relationships also bring out our feeling not good enough and our fears of the future and our expectations and attachments to outcomes. And that's where the mirror is. The mirror is I'm interacting with somebody, they're just being them, but what is it bringing out in them? How am I reacting to them? And it is through those reactions, especially the ones that are painful or uncomfortable, that we have the opportunity to learn about ourselves. And so I always look at relationship as, yes, it's painful. Yes, it's difficult. But yes, it is the greatest place for me to see a reflection of myself through how I'm reacting to that other person in the relationship. So with that in mind, Rebecca, I always want to give you an opportunity if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to comment, or would you just like me to continue?
No, you know what? I'm really glad that you said that, because I'm going to actually end this segment with a quote that is very relatable to what you're talking about, because oftentimes we tend to look at our relationships, and when we get triggered by them, we tend to think, oh, this is not something that I want to move forward with. But it is an opportunity for us to really look at ourselves and to really work through it and even understand the person on a deeper level. So I definitely want you to go deeper into how we can understand, how we can move forward with these triggers that we tend to have with our mirrors that in the relationships that we're in.
All right, so there's a few things that really are important when it comes to dealing with the triggers in relationship. And one of them is don't bail and don't go, it's your fault I feel this way. Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you inferior without your consent. You can
Yes.
put any emotion in there. No one can make you angry without your consent. No one can make you frustrated without your consent. It is not the other person that brings up those feelings for us. It is something unhealed in us that brings up those feelings for us. So one of the things that we have to do that's so important in relationship is we have to take a no blame policy. And I think I got that idea from an author named Gay Hendricks. He talks about a no blame policy. And I love it, because the whole idea with a no blame policy is that I'm no longer going to blame someone else, the person I'm in relationship with or the person I'm interacting with, for how I feel. Instead, what I'm going to do is say, gee, why did I react to them? What is going on in me and what is coming up to the surface for me to take a look at and for me to heal? And when I can do that, then I'm no longer a victim. So this is what happens in relationships a lot. We blame the other person for how we feel. And we think because they caused how we feel, they need to change.
Mm.
But the truth is that's not going to happen. And one of the things that I see with my clients in relationship is, they're begging, they're pleading, they're creating all kinds of really good arguments as to why you should change so that I can feel better. And sometimes the other person will change temporarily just to, avoid conflict or make the other person happy for a little while. But if it's not an internal change within them, it doesn't stick. And so the same arguments and the same difficulties keep coming up. And so, another way of putting what I'm trying to say is, where the ego would be is you walk in a room, you do or say something that pushes my buttons, and I'm going to look at you and say, I'm uncomfortable because of something you did, so you need to change. Whereas if you're out of ego and you're in truth and you're doing this kind of work, the real answer would be you came in the room, something you said or did brought up an uncomfortable feeling for me. Gee, what's going on in me that caused me to react to you in this way? And that is so powerful. When we do it the other way, we're a victim.
Right.
We're a victim because they have to change in order for us to feel better. But when we do it the second way, we're empowered. I can't change you. I can't make you be different. And by the way, I'm not saying that people can't change in the context of relationship, but they have to want to on their own and then do the work to actually make the changes. Otherwise, people are just the way they are based on their own subconscious programming. And I'll get into that a little bit in a minute. But the whole idea of self-empowerment is to no longer be relying on somebody else's behaviors in order to be happy, and no longer constantly be trying to change their behaviors in order to be happy, but instead taking control of the one thing that you can take control over, which is how I'm reacting and responding to you, and why am I reacting and responding to you. And that empowers me. And not only that, oftentimes once I take care of that, whatever the other person is doing or whatever their habit or behavior is, suddenly doesn't bother us anymore. So you get that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it goes back to the conversation that we had 3 weeks ago about the attachment styles, because oftentimes we have these expectations of people that are so unrealistic. And when we're taking care of ourselves, oftentimes we can detach ourselves from the expectations, the disappointments that often lead to disharmony in relationships, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so, with all of that in mind, we, as human beings with egos, have thoughts like this. Well, if you loved me, then you would show up the way I think you should show up. And if you don't love me, that's why you're doing what you're doing. And that's the begging and the pleading and the trying to change. Or you could be better than this. But one of the things that I want to get all the listeners clear on, we are behaving the best we can with the tools we have so far.
Absolutely.
And so to beg and plead somebody to change, if what's going on in their subconscious programming is I'm not enough and I have fears and all my past experiences have created certain assumptions about things, that's where they're going to come from no matter how much you try to beg and plead and reason with them to change so that you can be happy. People don't get up in the morning and say, gee, I think I'll be crappy today.
Right.
I think I'll be a jerk today. No, everybody's just being the best they can with the tools they have. And those tools really kind of boil down to what's going on in the subconscious, how they think, what they think about, how they think about themselves. And that's why they behave the way they do. So one of the things with that in mind that becomes so important when we want to have more enlightened relationships is acceptance.
Yes.
We have to accept each other as we are. Truly as we are, 100% as we are. And, and we talked about this again when we were talking about attachments a few weeks ago, but acceptance is a beautiful thing. And yet everybody's got it confused with resignation. I'm the loser. I'm the doormat. They win. I lose. I'm not going to get what I want if I accept them as they are. No, that's not what happens when we accept somebody as they are. What happens is we feel great because we're in acceptance. What happens is when we accept them as they are, we start to see what's right rather than what's wrong, and what we have rather than what we don't have, and their strengths rather than their weaknesses. But we also see who they are. There's a lot of people out there that are in bad relationships because they're basing the whole relationship on hope or potential. I hope they'll change. Maybe if they'll change, then we'll be good. And so I'm going to just stick it out in the hopes that they'll change. You can't start a relationship that way, and you don't want to stay in a relationship that way. But when you fully accept somebody as they are, you see who they are. And that gives you an opportunity to make a really wise choice. Should I stay or should I go? Is this the right person for me? So you're seeing
how do you go ahead and finish, but I do want to know, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, but how do you know when it is time to go?
It's not so. Even hearing how you're asking that question, the ego mind wants to figure it out. You can't figure it out. You just know when you know. And I'll give you some tools in terms of how to know. But one of the ways that gets you to the place where you know is acceptance.
Absolutely.
When we accept the other person as they are, and we totally see who they are, good, bad, and otherwise, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their beauties are, what their gifts are, because that's what happens with acceptance, that creates clarity. And what is happening with most people who say, I don't know, and should I stay or should I go, is they're not in acceptance. They're still in hope. They're still trying to change the other person. They still think that our relationship would be so much better if you would just change this thing. Okay? So one of the things that really helps with that and that clarity is total, pure acceptance. It's not resignation. Acceptance gives you clarity. It does not make you the loser or the doormat. And I really want to get clear on that. And for those of you who have questions about that, go back and listen to our podcast on attachments, because it explains it in detail there. So the other thing about accepting the person that you're with as they are is they feel accepted. When you want them to change, they can feel your judgment. They can feel that you think they're not good enough for them. And so they show up less cooperative and less collaborative, and they show up less authentic. And yet when you fully accept them as they are, they feel accepted. And so they show up more cooperative, more collaborative, and more authentically in the relationship. So these are all the benefits of accepting somebody as they are, and why it's so important as part of your process in having a higher level, real love relationship. And that's the other thing I want to get clear. Real love is not what we see on the movies. What we see on them, if you watch the rom-coms, they all kind of have the same theme. And the theme is, we can't get together, we can't get together, we can't get together, we can't get together, we should be together, we should be together, but we can't get together. We're finally together. The end. And so what we as the watcher, the audience, is feeling, and what we think we're feeling is passion and love. What we're feeling is yearning. And that's not passion and love. We're yearning. Why aren't they getting together? And oh, we want them to get together. And oh, I'm just feeling it. I'm feeling that yearning. And so we have that confused with love. Love is not need, and love is not yearning, and yearning is not love, and need is not love. Yearning is yearning, and need is need. And love accepts you as you are.
Absolutely.
Love does not need to change you. Love does not need to fix you. Love does not have any obligations. Love does not feel sorry for you. That's love. Okay? Love allows you to be who you are. Love doesn't take anything personally. You got that?
Absolutely.
And most of us don't have real love. Most of us, we're in a relationship, so you have obligations. You have to show up the way I want you to show up. We're in a relationship, so you need to be the way I need you to be. And what happens when we need somebody to be the way we want them to be is we prevent them from fully being who they are. Oftentimes people give up. I've had clients over the years that in order to make the other person happy, they've completely given up the things that they love, who they are, what they would like to do, just to make somebody happy so that they could stay in the relationship. That's not love.
Absolutely. And it's so important to have your own life, your own needs, your own desires, and your own friendships, all of it, in order for you to be able to make a healthy relationship work.
Correct. Now, something else aside from acceptance that's so important in all of this and being able to do all of this, not blaming and accepting somebody as they are, is it has to start with you. We have to love and accept ourselves first. In order to have healthy relationships, in order to take responsibility, in order to accept somebody as they are, I have to accept myself and love myself and know who I am, and not be walking around criticizing myself and putting myself down and thinking that I'm not enough. And we do have a podcast on that too. So people are welcome to watch that as well. I don't want to go into that and take away time from talking about relationships. But that relationship with yourself is so important, because in order to give love unconditionally, you have to love yourself. Otherwise, what relationships look like if we don't love ourselves is, sure, maybe we do give in the relationship, but then we're always pulling. We're pulling for, I'm giving, but what am I getting back? Or instead of saying, I love you, we say, I love you.
But
What's this? Yeah, and come on. And
I love
so,
you, but
well, or come on, I love you. You know,
yeah,
I love you, but you should do this differently.
absolutely.
Or I love you, and aren't you going to tell me back? And so there's always like this pulling at the other person because there's this condition tied to whatever you're giving to them. That goes away when you love yourself. It's
Mhm.
there when you don't love yourself. And what ends up happening with the other person is they start to feel like this after a while. Like, you're pulling at me, you're always pulling at me, you're needy. You know, when we don't love ourselves, we have needy relationships. You're not loving me enough. You're not complimenting me enough. You're not telling me how much you love me enough. Why aren't you telling me more? Why aren't you loving me more? But that just becomes like a drug addiction. And the more you get, the more you want. And the more you want, the more you need. And the more you need, the more dependent you become on the other person so that you can be happy. You just keep pulling and pulling and pulling at them until they can't stand it anymore.
Absolutely. You're so right. And it really all goes back to the relationship that you have with yourself and how you live out your days every single day. Because oftentimes, when we've accepted ourselves, when we are fully independent, it doesn't necessarily leave, because, personally, I've lived a very independent life for so long that oftentimes it was really challenging for me to be in relationship with somebody else because they didn't do it like me, or
Yes.
they didn't understand me fully, because I just had like such a deeper understanding of myself that I had like these, they do become unrealistic expectations a lot of times for people. So I'm so glad that you reiterate the fact that it's so important for us to love ourselves unconditionally, and we accept ourselves unconditionally so that we can accept others as they are without any expectations.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting too, because this reminds me of a story. So I was working with a gal who told me that when she first met her husband 30 years old earlier, she said to him, you know, you're going to need to love me more than anything else. And her husband looked back at him, and they were dating at the time. And he said, no, you know what? I have to love myself more than anything else first. And what she told me, you know, 30 years later, she says, you know, I always had a little resentment toward him because I felt like he didn't love me enough because he said that. She says, but now that I've worked with you, I realized that was the most important thing. And the reason we're still together 30 years later is because he did make that his number one priority and he did love himself. Then he was able to give without those conditions and without pulling at her and without that neediness and without that need for validation. So it is really important.
It is really important. Yes, you're so right.
Okay, the other thing that's really important in a relationship is you have to always remember that nothing anybody says or does is about you.
Mhm.
It's not about you. You know, I love that because I remember one time being upset with my husband because I had an attachment and I wanted him to show up a certain way. And then I had a whole story about what it meant if he didn't. And all of a sudden, taking a no blame policy and realizing, wait a minute, I have an attachment. And then I started looking at his behavior and I realized so does he. And he's attached to how he likes things done. And I'm attached to how I like things done. And all of a sudden, it just shifted everything for me. And I went into acceptance and said, you know, that's okay. I'll do my things my way and I'll let him do his things his way, rather than us having friction in our relationship because you're not doing it the way I think you should do it. And so, really getting that his behavior wasn't about me, it was about him and his needs and his desires and the way he sees things and the way he thinks and his subconscious programming and the behaviors that that creates. And that's all that his behaviors are about. And that's all that all my behaviors are all about. And when you can see that in a relationship, then it goes from judgment and anger and manipulation and you need to change to, okay, I totally get, you know, you have some subconscious programming and it's making you behave that way, and it's not about me, it's about what that programming produces and maybe some psychological strategies that you've used ever since you were a child to feel comfortable and get what you want, and that's okay. It's not about me, so I don't need to take it personally anymore. And in our intimate relationships, or even where that becomes really beneficial is in our work relationships, not to take anything personally, because it's not about you. Even your boss, you know, if you have a boss that's micromanaging you, that's not about you. That's about the fact that the boss only feels comfortable if he's in charge of how everything looks and how everything goes. If you don't take it personally, it changes your response, and it changes the nature of your reaction and how you interact with each other.
How do you, oh, go ahead.
Go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
How do you invite those conversations, especially in a, because you've been married for quite some time now,
Mhm.
and you shared some of the challenges that you had in your marriage throughout the time that you've been together. How do you invite those types of conversations in when somebody is doing something so different than you, obviously accepting it and knowing that that's what's happening, but also, being able to work together, because men and women are so different from each
Yeah.
other,
Yes.
especially if they've had different upbringings. Like, what are the core values that you tend to look at when those dynamics tend to be really challenging, and then that what, we can make this work. How
Yeah.
can we work together even though we're so different, to be able to function in a space where we're growing and we're evolving?
Wow. That question has a lot of different areas to address. So, I think, first of all, again, always accepting the other person as they are, making sure that you remind yourself that their behavior is not about you, that's about them and their conditioning and their programming, taking responsibility for your own reactions. And the
Mhm.
reason I'm saying all this first before I'm getting to what I think most people want to hear, in other words, how do I talk to them, is because if you do these other things first, you might not need to talk to them, because you might realize that what I'm feeling is just my stuff. And if
Mhm.
I can love myself, and if I can accept them as they are, and if I stop taking everything personally or misperceiving comments as criticisms because I don't love myself, and if I take responsibility for my own reactions, what people might realize is, wait a minute, it's not them, it's me.
Mhm.
It's me in this relationship, and I have the power to heal me and to change me and to grow within myself. And once I do that, a lot of those things they're doing may not be an issue anymore. So that's the first approach, is take responsibility. Why am I reacting? Now,
Mhm.
I want to go a little bit into, I don't want to overwhelm everybody with so much
Yep.
information, but on the same note, I want everybody to understand, why do we react the way we do? In other words, if I'm taking responsibility for my own reactions, why am I reacting the way I do? And basically, it's 5 things. I'm reacting the way I do because I think I'm not enough.
Mm.
I'm reacting the way I do because I have attachments and I don't want to let them go, or expectations. I'm reacting the way I do because my past history is jading how I'm seeing this current situation. I'm reacting the way I do because I'm always in fear of the future. I'm not actually in the moment in the relationship. I'm thinking about where it's going and what's going to happen. What does that mean? Or I'm reacting the way I do because I'm feeling resentful because I didn't tell the truth. I
Mhm.
said yes when I mean no. And so these are some of the reasons we react. So when you say, well, nothing anybody says or does is about me, but how I'm reacting to them is about me. So I need to take a look. In this particular situation, how did I react? What caused that reaction? Oh, it was, I'm not good enough. I took that personally. I got defensive. Okay, what would I need to do to heal myself in that instance? And what do you think you would need to do?
Just oftentimes it just goes back to the realization of what's going on inside of me.
Yeah, and then giving yourself some love and on and
Grace,
off,
yeah.
and really identifying with the truth of who you are and not the ego. Okay, and really, saying, okay, I reacted because I think. I'll give you an example that might make this clearer. So I was working with a gal who worked in a corporate situation, And she came to me one day and she said, Bonnie, red flag, red flag. There's this new guy at work and I think I like really need to stay away from him. I'm just feeling it. I feel a red flag. And I started to ask her a bunch of questions about what she was feeling. Because most of the time when we think we're feeling a red flag, that's not really what it is. It's that we're getting our button pushed because something in us is coming up to be healed. And so as I asked her questions, what I was able to really discover is that what she was really feeling was inadequate around him. He was just being him. But that brought out, it mirrored to her feelings of inadequacy. So as we talked about it and we were able to bring it up and, taking the no blame and taking responsibility for my own reactions, it was really clear. And she said, you know what, I think you're right. I think what I'm interpreting as a red flag is really, I need to work on my self-love. And so she worked on it. We talked about how to work on it. And she gave herself love and she focused on her strengths and what was right about her and got out of her head about it, about the negative self-talk. And about a month later, she comes to see me and she says, Bonnie, you're right. That wasn't a red flag. That was my I'm not good enough. And now that I've healed it, that guy's my best friend.
Isn't that interesting how that happens? Because oftentimes, and people that you wouldn't even think have those feelings of inadequacy, oftentimes we all have something that we are struggling with, that we are feeling insecure about. And it really comes down to the fact that when we come back to our present state of mind, we're all perfect and we're all trying to figure it out. It's just really recognizing that.
And I think when you do the no blame thing, and if you're committed to that, it really helps turn it around so that you can start recognizing. And by the way, no blame doesn't mean blame yourself either. No blame. Like, don't blame anybody else, don't blame yourself. But if I'm not blaming anyone and I'm not blaming myself, what I'm doing instead is I'm reflecting inward. And I'm saying, okay, what's coming up here within me that's making me think that this other person is causing my feeling? It's frustration, for example. Why do we get frustrated? That's usually because we have an expectation or an attachment or a vision of how we think something should be, and then that person's not showing up that way. So then we get frustrated. But they're just showing up the way they show up based on their programming. And so to try to change them is futile, but to go, wait a minute, why am I frustrated? Oh, because I wanted the oak tree to be a pine tree. That's why I'm frustrated. I'm going to take responsibility for that. I'm going to accept them as they are. So these are some things to start with, because I think oftentimes when we start with healing our own stuff, much of what we're finding problematic in the relationship actually isn't problematic. It's just I was having a reaction based on my own conditioning and my own unhealed places. Okay? So far, are you with me?
I'm with you.
Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have conversations and we don't talk. But usually when we talk to other people in relationship, we have, an agenda. We have an agenda. We, even when we think we're telling the truth, we have an agenda. And we want them to be different than they are. We want them to change. And, I'm just telling you the truth, but you need to change. And that's how we approach things. And of course, that doesn't get us anywhere, because that immediately puts up a wall of resistance.
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of the helpful tips in terms of how do I talk to somebody once I've taken responsibility for my own reactions is to use I statements. Now, I statements are an expression of how you feel. And this is what makes them so real and so authentic and hard to do. And the reason they're hard for most people to do is because in order to use an I statement and share how you feel, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And a lot of us are afraid of being vulnerable. We're afraid we're going to reveal something about ourselves that somebody is not going to like, and that's going to push them away and turn them away and make them not want to be with us anymore, or not want to be our friends or our lovers or whatever it is. But using an I statement can be really powerful, because if you're saying to somebody, listen, I notice whenever you say that, I feel inadequate. You're not saying to them, so stop saying that. You're just being authentic. And you're saying, and it might even be the approach that I'm telling you this because I want us to be intimate in our relationship. And I'm not talking about sex intimacy right now. I'm talking about connectedness, that kind of intimacy, which is what everybody's looking for in a relationship anyway, right? We just want to connect. We just want to have an intimate connection. But we can't have an intimate connection if we make assumptions and assume that somebody else can read our mind. We can't have an intimate connection if we aren't telling somebody our truth. So if I say to you, hey, babe, you know what? I know you might be seeing a little reaction from me, but it's because whenever I hear that from you, it kind of takes me back to my childhood and brings up some feelings of inadequacy. That is an I statement. That is a truth. That is a real connection. That is intimate. And why talking to each other this way is so beneficial is because it opens up a space for the other person to hear you. Doesn't necessarily mean they can change or will change, but at least they hear you and you feel heard, and your feelings are out there on the table. And there's a great book out there, if anybody's interested in reading more about communicating this way. It's called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And as a matter of fact,
add that to the description box. Nonviolent
communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I actually even have a friend that teaches it. So if anybody would like to learn how to do nonviolent communication, but it's really making a statement of what I feel.
Mm-hmm.
The other benefit of it is when we don't talk about how we feel with somebody and we're trying to share with them something that's going on for us, we end up using you. You did this, you did that, you did this. And when we do that, the ego immediately goes, yeah, and becomes defensive. When the ego hears a you statement, it feels attacked. When it feels attacked, it attacks back. It defends itself. It's funny, when I think about this, I remember when I was 13. And my mom and I, getting into it, love you, Mom. Love you so much. But, getting into it and her screaming, you did this, you did that. And what my little ego was doing was, well, you did this and you did that. I didn't hear a word she said. We're so busy coming up with our defense when we hear you, even if we know we're wrong. We hear you, we immediately the ego just goes right to, how can I defend my position? Mm-hmm. And then we don't hear what the other person says. The only way to open up a space for somebody to hear you is share what you're feeling. Yes. And the caveat is you have to do it without an agenda. Mm-hmm. You have to do it from that space of, I just want you to know, because we're in an intimate relationship. But you can do it as a boss, overseeing a team too. Listen, guys, I'm feeling a little stressed out. Marshall Rosenberg tells a story in his book about a bunch of hospital administrators who were presenting a proposal to a bunch of doctors. And the doctors had already turned the proposal down 17-1. And Marshall Rosenberg said, no. The next time you present this proposal, just start it out with how you feel. Say, we're feeling a little nervous about this. And of course, one of the doctors said, oh, no, we can't do that. That administrator said, no, we can't do that. The doctors will tear us to pieces if we do. But one of the administrators was brave enough to start the presentation with how we feel. And they ended up voting for it 17-1 in favor. So there's something about expressing yourself honestly, about being vulnerable, that helps you to be heard in a relationship and opens up a space for the other person to go, okay, well, maybe what's my part in this? And maybe there's something I need to do, as opposed to becoming defensive and
Yes.
just getting more and more stuck in their position.
Yes. And it all boils back to personal responsibility, and everything that we do and every type of relationship that we have, the environments that we place ourselves in. And yes, self-love, personal responsibility, and also one of the hardest things I think, and I'm speaking from personal experience, is vulnerability is one of the hardest.
Yes.
It's one of the hardest, you know, emotions to break, I guess, when you really are getting to know yourself. And I know this because I lived a very long time where I was single and I just was responsible for my own personal well-being. And oftentimes I didn't express myself because I knew that I could work through a lot of the emotions that I was feeling without allowing anybody into my experience, not letting them take responsibility for what I was feeling. And so I found myself having a hard time expressing myself, even when I had worked through a lot of these emotions, but just talking about it with the person that I might have felt that emotion with,
Yes.
that vulnerability is so hard to break. And
Okay, but why? Why was it uncomfortable? What's the fear? Think about it. What was the fear?
when it boils down to it, I just feel like a lot of these fears that we make up in our heads, thinking that somebody's not going to accept us for how we feel.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. It's a fear that if I am vulnerable and I reveal myself, that they're not going to like me.
Mhm.
Or if I'm vulnerable and I reveal myself, then my image of being the strong rock person that I've kind of displayed to everybody else is going to be crushed.
Mhm.
And then everybody will think that I'm less than I am. But that is the exact opposite of what really happens. Everybody has the same kinds of fears and the same kinds of feelings. It's interesting because earlier you said, men and women are different. I work with a lot of men. I work with probably 60-40 men, women. They're not different. We all have programming based on our upbringing, but the truth is we all have I'm not good enough, and we all have attachments, and we all keep going into the past, and we all fear the future, and we all say yes when we mean no, and tell lies because we don't want you to like us or not like us. And we at that level, at the deeper level, we're not different. Now maybe at the surface level we're different because men are taught to be strong and men are taught to, but when it comes down to what's creating the emotions and the difficulties in our relationships and in our business world and in our life, it's all the same fears.
Mhm.
And so, but people think that if I reveal my fears, then I'm not going to look strong, or I'm not going to be loved, or I'm not going to be liked. That's not true. Because we all have those, when you reveal your fears, people just like you more.
Yes.
And they like you more because now they feel a connection with you, because they go, oh yeah, I have that too. And now we can relate to each other, instead of you being the unapproachable strong guy who I can't relate to at all because you never revealed anything about yourself. It's in the revealing that we make that connection. I was working with a guy who was in sales, and he was having a lot of trouble connecting with everybody that he was selling to. And again, as we talked, I came to discover that he had this idea that he had to be the rock and the strong one. And there were so many things from his past and his childhood, and even, earlier on in his marriage, that made him feel like he has to be the rock. And so that's how he would show up on his sales calls. Only his boss was getting complaints. We just don't feel like we're connecting with this guy. And so I taught him how to be vulnerable. And once he did, all of a sudden his sales went from here to here. So, I have another guy, he had to do lots of presentations to great big giant corporate entities. And in order to preserve his image, he would make a 52 PowerPoint, 52 slide PowerPoint and stick to the PowerPoint. And so, but because of that, he was being the rock, and he was being the knowledgeable one, and he was being the knowing one, but he wasn't connecting with anybody. So I made him cut the PowerPoint presentation down to like 10. And I said, all right, now speak from your heart, because you know your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Speak from a human place. Be vulnerable. Talk about how you feel and what your experiences have been. And all of a sudden, he went from no sales to all of a sudden connecting with everybody and increasing his sales.
That is so interesting, because oftentimes, especially and this is why I'm actually having these conversations, because I myself have gone through a major transformation, and I'm still every day evolving. And this is one of the things that I've vowed to practice, is vulnerability, transparency, and really understanding myself on a deeper level, to be able to connect with people on a deeper level. Because this is really what Bonnie's talking about, is what everybody wants, regardless if we're male or female. We all just want to connect at the end of the day. And we just have these like ego, we just oftentimes allow our ego to get the best of us. And when we just allow ourselves to be vulnerable in that space of transparency and just authenticity, we do have the ability to connect with people deeper than we ever imagined. And I'm practicing this every day.
All right. So something else that I want to say about this, and I even caught myself doing this. Excuse me for a second. I was getting hot. There's a little heater back there. Anyway, excuse me, or I caught myself doing this. I caught myself realizing that I'm withholding love at times. Well, because you don't deserve it. You acted like a jerk. You didn't show up the way I wanted you to. So now I'm withholding love. But, whenever I had caught myself doing that, I would reflect on a Marianne Williamson quote. Love her. Marianne Williamson said, there's only one of us here. What we give to others, we give to ourselves. What we withhold from others, we withhold from ourselves. And I would realize, wait a minute, if I'm withholding love because you don't deserve it, who's the one in pain? I am. Who's the one missing out? I am. And then it started to make me realize too, that not only am I missing out, but that real love is not about what you get. It's about what you give, without conditions, might I add. But it's about what you give. Everybody's looking for, I want to be loved so that I can get this feeling, so that I can get fulfilled, so that I could get validated, so that I could get seen. Okay. And that'll make me feel good, and that'll make me whole. But real love is not about what I get. It's about what I give without conditions. And sometimes people say, well, we've been in a relationship for a while and I'm not really feeling the passion. How do we get the passion back? Love without conditions. Start focusing on what you have rather than what you don't have, and what's right rather than what's wrong, and what's good rather than what's bad, and what the strengths are rather than the weaknesses. You really notice that about the person you're with, and just love them. And notice how you feel when you do. That thing that we're looking for to get from somebody else, it's already in you.
Yes.
You just have to notice, and you have to give without the condition. Think about Mother Teresa. The people that she serviced, they could barely meet their just lower level needs, food, shelter, and water, right? So they weren't able to go, oh, Mother Teresa, we just think you're the most amazing. We love you so much. She didn't need that. She was already fulfilled. Why? Because she was giving without any conditions. And she could feel that. And we're so busy looking for that condition that we're not feeling what is already within us, which is the ability to love and give love and feel love. When I talk about this, it always reminds me of a movie with Diane Keaton and Meryl Streep called Marvin's Room.
Hmm.
And I highly recommend it. And I'm sorry if anybody hears this and they go, well, Bonnie, that's not exactly how it went, but this is my interpretation of it, okay? And Marvin's Room is two sisters, and one is kind of living from the outside in. In other words, what can I get? What can I get? What can I get? That was Meryl Streep's character. And the other one's living from the inside out. What can I give? What can I give? What can I give? And Diane Keaton has cancer. And she asks her sister and her nephew, Leonardo DiCaprio, to come and get their bone marrow tested. Now, they're both not happy, Leo and Meryl, their characters, because they're living, what can I get? What can I get? What can I get? Right? And it's everybody else's fault that I feel this way. And bleh. Diane Keaton just loves. And you watch this transformation happen while they're living in her house, because no matter what they do, even if it's not very nice, she still loves them. And love, giving love can transform. And this is one of the things you see in the movie, but I love this one part in the movie where Diane Keaton looks at Meryl Streep and goes, I have had such love in my life. And Meryl Streep, and again, I'm totally paraphrasing to make a point here, but because it's sort of not exactly like I'm saying, but Meryl Streep says, what are you talking about? You never even had a boyfriend. Meryl Streep's been divorced twice, right? And Diane Keaton says, no, I've had such love in my life. And Meryl says, okay, yeah, our father with dementia and our crazy Aunt Ruth, yeah, they love you. Yeah, you have love. And Diane Keaton says, no, I love them. Doesn't that hit you?
Yes, because it really is about loving yourself first in order for you to be able to give that love selflessly. And that happens so naturally when you know that at the end of the day, we are all made perfection, and every single person that's coming into our experience is just a reflection of that perfection. And we're able to give that love, like Bonnie says, unconditionally. And it does bring so much more fulfillment and joy into our lives when we just accept people for who they are. And we have the capacity to have beautiful relationships that way, regardless if it's a romantic relationship, whether it's friendships, they just flow with ease. And
All right.
that's
Okay, sorry.
oh, no, go ahead.
Something I really want to clear up, and I think it's really important to say. So yes, relationships are pushing our buttons to help us grow. And the people that push our buttons the most are giving us the most information about what we need to heal within us.
Mm-hmm.
However, and this is why I wanted to say this before we finish today, that does not mean to stay in a relationship where the only thing that's happening is the person's pushing your buttons. A lot of times people kind of spiritualize it away. In other words, I'm too afraid to get out of the relationship, so I'll spiritualize my reasoning for staying. Oh, because they're pushing my buttons and I'm learning things. If that's all that's happening in the relationship, then no, that's not a healthy relationship. It's time to move on. But if there's a nice balance, they bring out my joy, and they bring out my ability to love and to laugh and to feel good and to feel intelligent, and they bring out my ability to give, but they also push my buttons, then that's a place to stay. And I really wanted to make sure that everybody knew that there has to be that balance, especially in intimate relationships. Otherwise, if they're just pushing your buttons, the excuse, yeah, but they're giving me growth opportunities, it's not enough. There has to be some balance.
Right. No, and there definitely has to be respect. There has to be honesty. There has to be communication, accountability, and loyalty in a relationship. And last week when we did the self-love talk, I talked about narcissistic, but it's narcissistic and egotistical love, where it's all about that personal gain and even manipulation and trying to get people to do what it is that you want them to do. And that love is very conditional. And so, there is a very big difference in what Bonnie is talking about, because there are a lot of growth opportunities when it comes to unconditionally loving relationships, but also making sure that there is a lot of respect and that the core values that are important to you are still there, that the foundation is strong enough to where even though you're being triggered, that you can still work through those, and there's no disrespect or disloyalty in that relationship. So this was good, Bonnie. These are always such healing conversations for me, and I know that they're such healing and helpful conversations for those who are tuning in, because again, these conversations are so valuable and they're so needed for us to be able to continue to keep ourselves accountable so that we can grow within ourselves and in every single relationship dynamic that we have, because every single person that we're encountering, we're in a relationship with. So do you have any finishing statements, Bonnie?
No, you know what? I think that I've covered it. If anybody's having a struggle in their relationships and they'd like to know more, especially, the part about how do I take responsibility for my own reactions, that takes a lot of introspection and some deep work. And so if there's anybody that would like to know more about that and have some help, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to help you with that. But, I know that relationships are, I've heard it said like this, fertile ground for growth. At the same time, they are also a beautiful place for us to feel love and give love and all of that. And again, just make sure that you have that balance. And it's not just all about my buttons are getting pushed and that I'm learning from it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will always add Bonnie's and my information on the description box. Please share, like, subscribe to these videos, because again, these conversations are so important and they're so needed in the time that we're living in today. And I leave you with this quote: "My primary relationship is with myself. All others are mirrors of it. As I learn to love myself, I automatically receive the love and appreciation that I desire from others. If I am committed to myself and to living my truth, I will attract others with equal commitment. My willingness to be intimate with my own deep feelings creates the space for intimacy with another. As I learn to love myself, I receive the love I desire from others." And this is a quote from Shakti Goen, who is also an author and personal development coach. So I am so grateful that you took the time to join us today. Thank you again, and I will see you next week. Peace.